Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the webinar Making Data Work, Applying GMP and POPs Inventories for Evidence-Based Policy in NIPS. My name is Jana Truo, a knowledge management specialist working with GGKP on one of its global environment facility technical assistance projects focused on chemicals and waste. I will be your webinar moderator today. Thank you for registering and joining us. This webinar is part of the Global Knowledge Sharing Activities conducted by the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, or GGKP, under Component 4, Knowledge Management and Information Sharing, of the GEF-funded UNEP-led project 10785 Global Development Review and Update of National Implementation Plans, also known as NIPS, under the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which we all know as the Global NIP Update Project. In the context of the Stockholm Convention and the global effort to phase out POPs, accurate data and robust inventories are crucial for evidence-based policy making. National implementation plans serve as essential tools for countries to fulfill their obligations under the Convention. Thus, our topics today aim to explore how data from the Global Monitoring Plan, or GMP, can be handled and interpreted, and national POPs inventories data can be leveraged to enhance NIP development and implementation and inform policy design. Focusing on the practical application of these datasets, we hope today's presentations will offer valuable insights into past and ongoing GMP efforts and highlight opportunities for utilizing data to support sound environmental governance and effective POPs management. A kind reminder that our webinar is on the Zoom platform. It will be conducted in English and is recorded. This event is supported with interpretation into French, Spanish, and Russian. Please feel free to select your language in the bottom panel of your screen. The event is technically facilitated by my GGKP colleague, Sumin Bey. Once we start, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. It is a great opportunity to meet colleagues from all over the world. So, for today's agenda, we have 5 speakers lined up. 3 speakers will give technical overview about POPs inventories, data handling, and interpretation. Ongoing efforts to enhance global monitoring as recommended by the Stockholm Convention. The webinar will wrap up with 2 country examples presented by distinguished speakers from Kenya and Uruguay. After the speakers' presentations, an interactive Q&A session will provide space for discussion and peer learning. Materials and resources, including a video recording of today's webinar, will be made available through GGKP's Knowledge Platform. So, let's begin now. Our first speaker is Ms. Mihaela Pon, Program Management Officer in the Agri-Food and Health Unit in UNEP. Mihaela primarily focuses on the provision of project and program management, on the prevention, minimization, and environmentally sound management of POPs. She is an experienced environmental policy specialist with extensive experience in chemicals and waste management. We're delighted to have her with us today. Welcome, Mihaela.
Thank you, Yana, and good day, colleagues. I will say good day because you are joining from all over the place. So let me try to share my screen now, and I will try to be very brief within my presentation. So kindly let me know if you see it.
Yes, we can see it well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it is a pleasure for me to take the floor today to address the topic of leveraging POPs inventory data to enhance the development and implementation of the NIPS, or National Implementation Plans, and to inform policy design. So my intervention basically draws on UNEP's experience working closely with parties of the Stockholm Convention, of course, with our colleagues in the BRS Secretariat, but also with the regional centers and other stakeholders involved into the implementation of the Stockholm Convention, but also beyond within the chemicals and waste cluster and global agenda. Okay. So now trying to set the scene for this discussion. So we know that POPs are basically those chemicals that are transferred at long range distances, and they persist in the environment, they bioaccumulate, and they are toxic. So addressing these chemicals basically requires a strong evidence base. So for these reasons, POPs inventories are one of the foundational tools provided under the Stockholm Convention framework and related guidance. So they allow countries to identify sources and quantities of POPs, track their evolution over time, and assess progress towards elimination. While inventories are often perceived as purely technical exercises, they are in fact playing an essential strategic role. And why I'm saying this is because they enable policymakers, regulator, and implementing agency, for example, of GEF, to move from assumptions to evidence-based priorities, from broad commitments to targeted action, and from isolated interventions to coordinated national strategies. So under the Stockholm Convention, the preparation and updating of the national implementation plans is anchored into the availability of reliable inventory data, of course. So without a solid data on POPs, production, use, emissions, stockpiles, contaminated sites, data, so without the solid data, NIP risks to become an aspirational document rather than an actionable implementation framework. So, as you probably all know, POPs inventory is not just a list of chemicals. It's basically a structured, systematic assessment covering different categories of POPs. We work with these: pesticide, industrial POPs, unintentional POPs, and so on and so forth. So when correctly designed and implemented, an inventory becomes, as I said, a dynamic tool that reflects the real situation in the country. It also reveals the information that would otherwise remain invisible to policymakers. And here, examples like hidden stockpiles, chemicals in different products still circulating in the markets, or emissions, including from informal sectors, for example. So now let me emphasize the critical role of inventory data in enhancing the NIP development and update as well. So first, inventories enable baseline assessments, helping countries to understand what POPs are, where POPs are present, for example, in what quantities, in which sectors. This baseline is vital for setting realistic national targets and timeline, deciding where to allocate limited resources, and also for prioritizing the interventions. Second, inventory data enhances the accuracy and completeness of NIP updates. As parties are required to update their NIPs when new chemicals are listed under the convention, the inventory process provides the necessary evidence base for integrating these new elements. And basically, this ensures that NIPs remain relevant and comprehensive documents that reflect the current obligation. Third, inventories improve intersectoral coordination during the development stage, because we know that POPs are present or affect different sectors like agriculture, industrial sectors, waste management related sector, public health, custom, environmental, and so on. Therefore, the inventory process often becomes a catalyst for the national dialogue among institutions. So it brings together all these actors. And it is an important governance value that should not be underestimated. So the fact that it brings together all the relevant stakeholders. And finally, the availability for robust data of this kind of robust data strengthen the international, the reporting under the convention, allowing parties to provide more complete national reports and enabling more meaningful aggregation in the global context as well. So now, while the development of NEP is important, the real impact occurs at the level of implementation, of course. Here again, the inventory data plays a decisive role. Inventory data allows countries to identify priority sectors and actors, including those requiring technical assistance, regulatory attention, or financial support. So, for example, data may reveal, okay, large PCB stockpiles. I'm taking this example, but for sure there are many others in the energy sector. So, or the widespread of open burning in informal waste management, or high levels of dioxin emissions from certain industrial processes. So that's, having such a tool is key to advance. Second, inventories may support also the deployment of best available techniques and best available practices, helping regulators and project planners, for example, to understand where such practices are needed, for example. These interventions are much more effective when grounded in concrete data rather than assumptions. Third, inventory results can be also used to design monitoring and surveillance programs, which are essential to assess exposure trends, identify hotspots, and measure progress. Without inventories, such monitoring efforts will lack initial reference points. Fourth, inventory also, and not least, but I'm just listing few ideas here. Fourth, inventory data facilitates the mobilization of both national and international resources. For example, GEF project formulation require clear baselines and well-defined problem statements. Countries that maintain updated POPs inventory are better positioned to secure funding from for different projects like on PCB disposal, pesticide management, or any other. So, or current project that happen in different industrial sectors. Now, another crucial dimension is the translation of the technical inventory data into policy relevant insights. This translation allows the inventory findings to inform regulatory and strategic decisions, including regulatory bans and restrictions on POPs chemicals and products, emission limit values and environmental quality standards, for example, setting up this one, or waste management and disposal controls and custom enforcement actions. And then inventory data further strengthens the policy coherence among related multilateral environmental agreements, including, in our case, Basel and Rotterdam, but also supports the convergence with other frameworks, such as Minamata Convention in case of emissions, or basically global framework on chemicals or global biodiversity framework. So this coherence is vital for countries seeking to modernize the chemicals and waste governance systems, avoiding duplication and maximizing synergies across sectors. To summarize the value proposition, leveraging POPs inventory data yields significant benefits for countries. So supports the enhanced compliance with the Stockholm Convention obligations. The same helps with evidence-based policy design rather than being reactive or having fragmented approaches. Supports the better prioritization of financial and technical resources, improve enforcement capacity, especially to better coordination between regulators and all other stakeholders. Provide more transparent national reporting to the conference of the parties and better ensure better engagement with the different stakeholders as I was mentioning earlier. And not least, improves the risk communication to the public. Therefore, when inventories remain up to date and accessible, they become powerful levers for both national action and international cooperation. And then, there are still, of course, some challenges and systemic gaps, and it is important to acknowledge that many parties continue to face these challenges in developing and sustaining a high quality POPs inventory. So here I listed a few of the common obstacles that are identified. I mean, we have seen throughout our work. So the data collection is fragmented and sometimes, I mean, incomplete. There is insufficient analytical and laboratory capacity. Sometimes, we lack the standardized methodologies and harmonized reporting formats. Limited resources, of course, it's one of the challenges and continues to remain a challenge. Weak coordination across different government ministries, which, I think it is still there. I mean, advancements have been made, but and then the others, I will not go into reading all, but these challenges basically underscore that the need for sustained capacity development, governance improvements, and technical cooperation is crucial. So my last slide, so basically looking ahead, there are significant opportunities to strengthen POPs inventories and basically magnify their impact. So first, standardization and methodological harmonization can help ensure that interventions are comparable over time and across countries. And here already UNEP and the regional centers are working together and supporting these efforts. You remember that there is the Stockholm Convention integrated electronic toolkit put in place with the aim to lead towards this harmonization, basically. Second, there is considerable potential to leverage digital systems, geospatial tools, and data platform to make inventory more efficient, more accurate, and easier to update. So I think this is one aspect that we need to continue working on it and how should I say, bring it to the 21st century. For instance, a digital inventory can integrate mapping of contaminated sites or stockpile tracking or waste flows, enabling authorities to visualize hotspots and trends. So that is one example. Third element or opportunity is strengthening the multi-stakeholder partnership, which I see as essential. So POP are not only an environmental issue alone, they impact and depend on agriculture, industrial development, energy, trade, public health, and so on. So engaging all these stakeholders early supports smoother implementation and more sustainable outcome. Fourth, I was also thinking of there is a scope for enhanced South-South cooperation, especially through regional centers, related work and platforms that facilitate the knowledge exchange, peer learning, and shared solutions. And finally, inventories can all be connected to the broader policy framework, such as the sustainable consumption and production, circular economy initiatives, and others. So this creates basically openings for systemic solutions that go beyond, for example, end of pipe type of measures. So I thank you very much. And yes, I'm looking forward to interact with the audience as needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mihaela. That was very clear. And I like the last slide where you highlighted how what you just said is really translated into action and reality. So thank you. Thanks, Mihaela. We are monitoring the Q&A for any questions. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. For now, let me introduce our next speaker, Hao Song Zhao, an Associate Program Management Officer for the Chemicals and Science and Policy Unit in UNEP. Hao Song is an experienced project manager with strong expertise in global environmental monitoring, data analysis, and policy development. She is a particular focus on chemical pollution and has managed international projects, coordinated closely with diverse stakeholders, and contributed to the development of environmental policies and analytical reports. She is here today to speak to us about data handling and interpretation for the monitoring of POPs and will guide us through the Stockholm Convention principles. Thank you and welcome, Hao Song.
Thank you very much, Yana, for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. It's my pleasure to join you today. And I'm overwhelmed by the introduction that Yana gave. Actually, I'm happy to share experience I have regarding the POPs monitoring activities and how the data can be useful for the decision-making part. And I hope you can see my screen now. Is it working? It's in presentation mode, right?
Could you please make it as a presentation mode?
I think it is already. Is it working now in
It's good
presentation mode?
now. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. So I will start now. So actually, how to use the GMP Global Monitoring Plan data for policymaking has been a question we kept thinking in our mind for a long time. And as you all know, that Global Monitoring Plan monitors mainly the background site and gives the global representative baseline information to understand the levels of changes of POPs in environment and in humans. It's a little bit challenging to use directly into a national specific policy making. Therefore, over the past many years, we tried different ways to see how we can better support countries with making the data more meaningful and useful. And today I will share some examples we had and also tools developed with the previous GMP, UNEP GMP projects, and then also share some upcoming work plans in the future through new projects and programs and how we can further emphasize our support to countries on data interpretation and informed decision making. And these projects were all supporting the implementation of the Stockholm Convention. I think other colleagues later on will share more mandates from the Stockholm Convention's aspect. So I will merely focus on the UNEP projects and all the experience gained from the projects themselves. So to start with some background information, from 2004 until recently, UNEP had rounds of projects supporting the implementation of the Stockholm Convention, specifically the effectiveness evaluation of the convention and its global monitoring plan. And with funds from different stakeholders, from different donors, including the Global Environment Facility, rounds of projects were conducted since 2004 on the development of guidance documents and the pilot test of protocols, rounds of interlaboratory assessments, 6 or 7 rounds of human milk surveys, etc., 2 rounds of global monitoring plan projects covering a total of 42 countries to conduct monitoring of core matrices, including air, human milk, water in different countries. And this information has been shared with the Convention Secretariat for the effectiveness evaluation and for the preparation of the global monitoring plan reports. The recent round of the project was conducted in 2016 to 2024, covering 42 countries, including 15 countries in Africa, 11 countries in Latin America, 7 countries in Asia, and 9 Pacific Island countries. And these projects generated data on air, water, human milk, and matrices of national interest, including, for example, dairy, food, eggs, meat, and sediment, and provided critical information for a number of countries as the unique source of environmental background level of POPs for these countries. And this project also conducted trainings in 26 national laboratories and conducted 2 rounds of interlaboratory assessments to help countries to build local capacities on the analysis of POPs in different matrices. With the data generated, we created a dashboard which is available on the UNEP website to share all the findings with stakeholders. And this dashboard, as you can see on the first image on this slide, it allows data retrieving the visualization by country, by region, by years, by matrices, and also by different types of POPs. And we hope this dashboard could be useful for countries to visualize immediately how their levels of POPs are changing, how their historical information are presented, and support them to generate graphics and information directly can be used in national context for decision making. It also allows countries to compare with other regions and other countries to see the relative levels of their POPs. And with that dashboard developed, we still receive other questions from countries like how can we make better use of the data and how can we understand how to process and handle the data. Therefore, other activities were conducted, including developing a guidance document on data reporting and management, specifically to assist the countries with reporting the data into the required format for the Stockholm Convention, the GMP data warehouse. There's a specific template and module or algorithm used to ensure the data consistency, comparability, and also ensure the data are using the correct unit and algorithm to be aggregated into the platform. Therefore, this guidance was developed and shared. And we also developed a self-paced e-course of data handling and data interpretation, which will be a major part of today's presentation. I will go into more details in the next few slides. So this is a screenshot of the data dashboard, which is available on the UNEP website. It includes not only the results of monitoring from the UNEP GEF projects, but also provides an entry point for countries and stakeholders to assess the interlaboratory assessment results, training and capacity building activities, and sampling activities, as well as the option to download the whole data set for localized analysis and other interpretation. And regarding the course, with support from BCRC, SCRC China, and BCCCRC RC Uruguay, UNEP collaborating with two Stockholm and Basel Convention regional centers, we developed this data handling and interpretation course for the monitoring of POPs under the Stockholm Convention. It includes 6 major modules. The first 2 modules are on the introduction and sharing of background information, particularly the expectation limits of global background monitoring of POPs and how these activities were originally designed to support the effectiveness evaluation of the convention, not exactly on informing the specific national decision-making regarding hotspot contamination or sources of contamination. But then module 3, 4, and 5, and 6 provided detailed instructions on how this data should be handled, managed, interpreted in a way to the best possible to use the data in different national contexts, especially information to for countries and for stakeholders to see how the information were handled in the dashboard and within the UNEP project, and how this information could be further used and for broader purposes. So the course objective of the course is to support the convention and parties of the Stockholm Convention in the processing of data on levels of POPs in national circumstances and for informed decision making and actions towards elimination of these toxic chemicals. And we hope that this course can benefit technical staff involved in POPs monitoring activities, especially those involved in the management of data and the presentation of results to national decision makers and stakeholders. Zooming into some technical aspects of the course, regarding the monitoring process, many people consider environmental monitoring refers to systematic sampling of air, water, soil, biota in order to observe and study the environment as well as the derive knowledge from this process. It involves different types of monitoring, like successive monitoring to review a trend, prediction monitoring to check whether an expectation is achieved, impact monitoring to see whether an impact was anticipated, or mitigation success monitoring to check whether objective of a specific action was achieved. And it involves mainly 4 steps, depending on the purpose of the monitoring. First, a country or a study group will design the monitoring campaign program. And afterwards, the activities will be conducted with samples collected and analyzed in laboratories, and then data will be delivered. So after delivering of data, next critical step is data handling. This is the process of collecting, recording, and presenting information in a way that is helpful to the others. It can also be defined as the method for performing statistical analysis on the given data and transfer the records into useful information. Therefore, to generate meaningful messages, data needs to be comparative, validated, and harmonized, and capable of reviewing trends over time in various regions. And the typical data handling process involves database configuration, data quality assurance, data analysis, data interpretation, and in the end, communication and presentation of the results. Data interpretation gives meanings to the information analyzed and determines its significance and implications. It's intended to help people make sense of the numerous data that have been collected, analyzed, and presented. And in interpreting data, an analyst must attempt to discern differences between the correlation, causation, and coincidence, as well as many other biases, but also must consider all the factors involved that may have led to a result, the context. This slide shows some of the steps involved in data interpretation process. For example, when a user downloads the full dataset from the UNEP dashboard, you may get the whole set of data covering different time trends, covering different years, different locations, different matrices, and also involves a set of metadata, including the temperature, duration of the sampling period, methods used, and specific POPs identified levels, and LOQ, LOD, for example. Then the analyst will need to dive into the information to see how the data can be meaningful for a specific country. And this associated context, not only about the environmental background monitoring data itself, can also link to the surrounding of the sampling site, the national policies, and the experience within the country and other associated data sources. For example, if a country observes a very high level of PCTD, PCDF, or an increasing trend of one type of industrial chemicals, what does it mean for a country? And this is beyond international researchers' point of view to judge for the country. It needs local experiences or local policy interpreters to tell, are there relevant activities happening in the country that may trigger the increase or decrease of the levels of a specific POP and what actions can be taken afterwards. So that's part of the most important steps involved at the national level for the interpretation of the background monitoring results. So this figure shows an example of how the data grouped in different ways can help generating different information. It can be grouped by years. It can be grouped by the type of sampling size. It can be grouped by POPs, different groups of chemicals, for example. And the different grouping may tell us a different type of information depending on what you really want to communicate to your national policymakers and to your stakeholders. This slide is another example that when we compare PCDD, PCDF levels, different types of figures may give you very different information regarding some are highlighting the levels, some are highlighting the trend, some are highlighting the share among the different, the relative importance or priorities of the different contaminants. So these are just a few examples how countries or stakeholders can make use of the data and sharing or conveying a piece of message or information to the audience. And here I want to highlight the analysis of trends, patterns, and the relationships with the data. So usually the GMP monitoring activities or long-term sustainable monitoring exercise, you may find every 4 or 5 years a set of data. Therefore, it's very relevant to review the trend expressed by this data. For example, we observed DDT level has decreasing for 70% over the last years in human milk. That's a meaningful piece of trend information. We have observed a steady level of certain POPs in the air in the last 20 years. And what does that mean? That's trend information. There are also patterns that we can observe. For example, if we conduct seasonal air monitoring, you may observe every spring or every autumn, the pattern is different from the information generated from every summer and every winter. And these seasonal patterns can also tell the relative relationship between the levels of POPs with the meteorological information, with the weather condition, with other local circumstances in the country. So this may also provide useful information for your local decision makers regarding what actions will be most relevant and useful and impactful for tackling the contamination of POPs. And there are also other relationships to be revealed through the interpretation of the data. So these might be aspects that a data user may pay attention to. And there are additional assessment tools that could be useful to generate more information, make more use of the data. For example, satellite image information or trend pathway analysis tools that may help to understand where the sources of the contamination come from. So these are broader research topics. In general, that we suppose the GMP data or the POPs monitoring, environmental background monitoring results can not only support the effectiveness evaluation of the Stockholm Convention, but can also provide useful insights into health impact assessment, risk assessment, as well as providing information to sensitize local stakeholders, decision makers, and as well as the general public. Here, I want to share one specific example. So in one country, we observed a very high level of PCDD, PCDF, and then the national stakeholders and government really paid attention to that and thought, what can we do with it? So in addition to using the information, the POPs monitoring, background monitoring results into their national implementation plan updating, they also collaborated with local communities to make use of the data. So one activity they did with the local community was to encourage them to segregate rubbish and to stop open burning of plastics. So the local farmers or local household people, local people were encouraged to reuse the cooking oil containers for planting. And the photo you can see on this slide is an example that how they are reducing the open burning of plastics. And we were really impressed to see the concrete activities done at the community level to make use of POPs monitoring data. And this really makes us feel the work makes sense and can really help protecting the health of people and the environment. So those were all activities done in the past. In the future, we have one new GEF-funded global chemicals monitoring program recently approved, which will continue environmental background monitoring of POPs and mercury to support the effectiveness evaluation of the Stockholm Convention as well as the mechanism of the Minamata Convention. And this program will start from this year for a duration of 5 years, covering 5 regions, including 54 countries in Africa, Asia Pacific, Caribbean, and Latin America and the Caribbean regions. Through these projects, in addition to conducting sampling, data generation, and capacity building activities, one important angle is to support data reporting using interpretation and use. This is not limited to reporting data to the Stockholm and the Minamata conventions, but will also support interpretation of data for national and regional decision making, including through establishing a comprehensive data platform to enable data use across different topics, as well as a set of training and data interpretation exercise to support really linking the data, especially the background monitoring data, with national policy and decision makings. So please stay tuned for the upcoming activities, and we do hope in the future UNEP can provide more guidance and more useful tools to support data for informed decision making. And last but not least, we will also establish a community of practice to encourage broader collaboration with local researchers and stakeholders. And we hope this can facilitate broader coverage and broader dissemination of the information and encourage broader use of the data generated. We believe that the good ideas sit with the regional researchers, with broader experts, and we look forward for future collaborations. And I think this is my last slide. I will stop here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hao, and that's very efficient. We're actually way ahead of our schedule. So I can pause here a bit and check if there are any questions. I've seen very lively postings on our Q&A box. I invite everybody to have a look. Mr. Victor Rodriguez Moreno and Mihaela have already started the conversation going about the history and context of POPs and how it's related to human activities. So maybe, I invite our speakers to have a look at the Q&A box. But at this point, if there's anybody from our audience who also wants to post questions, you're very free. And then maybe Mihaela and How Song, do you want to add anything? Or if not, we can move on to the next speaker. Okay.
Nothing
So
from my
I'm
end. No.
very good. Thank you. We'll come back during the Q&A session, but I think this is a very good juncture for us to introduce our third speaker. Our third speaker is Kay Ono-Woodall, Senior Program Management Officer from the BRS Secretariat at UNEP, and she coordinates the scientific work of the Stockholm Convention POPs Review Committee and the Rotterdam Convention Chemical Review Committee. So she supports a lot of the review and listing of new chemicals under the conventions. Moreover, Kay also leads the PRS plastics related work following the Basel Convention plastic waste amendments and heads the From Science to Action program, which strengthens the science policy interface. Very relevant for our discussion today because she will be talking about ongoing GMP efforts of the Stockholm Convention Secretary. Everyone, let's welcome Kay as she walks us through these discussion points. Welcome, Kay.
Hi. Hi, thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, so I'm from the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, and will be explaining the ongoing efforts under the convention, which is heavily supported by the UNEP-GEF project. And I realized that the information that's obtained from the process of GMP also contributes to the development of national implementation plans. Again, another project that is supported by GEF and the UNEP's effort. So I think that all the participants here today is aware of the very important criteria of the persistent organic pollutants. They're all persistent, as the name says, and bioaccumulative. That means that the concentration level of POPs will increase as the food chain will go into the higher level, and that will cause the human health effects if the human consumes the food that contain POPs. And so the adverse effects is the very important another criteria of POPs that could be occurring to environment and also on human health. Lastly, the POPs, this is another, the reason why the persistent organic pollutants is managed through international agreement is because it cannot be solved in just one country as they travel long distance far from the source of these contaminants. So it is called potential for long-range environmental transport. And in fact, global monitoring plans data is quite important to monitor also the situation related to long-range environmental transport. Taking into account these criteria, there is a mechanism to add new persistent organic pollutants under the Stockholm Convention. And while the convention started only with 12 POPs, known as dirty dozen, now that it lists 37 things, as you can see in this screen. The pesticides were the main original 12 POPs. Those chemicals that are with underlines are the initial dirty dozen. And then through the mechanism specified in Article 8 of the Convention, the Stockholm Convention has grown to 37 listings. A lot of them are industrial POPs, as you can see, Deca-BDE, Hepta-BDE, PFOA, SCCPs, and so on in the left bottom corner of this slide. And then, as you know, under the convention, we have Annex A for elimination, Annex B for restriction, and Annex C for unintentional restriction. So Annex C means that unintentionally occurring POPs, including dioxins and furans, and other chemicals like PCB and HCB. These chemicals are produced unintentionally. They're not used intentionally, but produced as a result of processes like open burning and so on. So these are the chemicals that are included in the convention through the mechanism of adding new chemicals specified in Article 8. And it has all been one of the challenges expressed by parties and complication that the convention is not static, but always parties need to revise and update their national implementation plans and also start monitoring new types of chemicals. Often newer ones are more complicated, like MCCPs, long-chain PFCAs that are marked in the red color in this slide. Those are the newly listed POPs, and they tend to be much more complicated to analyze compared to the chemicals that are originally listed because of the lack of scientific understanding in some parts of the world where you still do not have old data to compare with, and so on. So you can see the complexity and dynamic of the Stockholm Convention just looking at this slide. And at the bottom, you can see that there is one set of chemicals currently under review. They are brominated dioxins and furans, as well as mixture of polybrominated and chlorinated dioxins and furans. These chemicals are, again, unintentionally produced substances and therefore proposed for listing in Annex C to the Convention. And the POPs Review Committee is currently preparing a revised draft risk profile for consideration at the next meeting in September. And once these chemicals are listed, then the Stockholm Convention's obligation would apply. So as I mentioned that the convention started with 12 chemicals, but through that mechanism involving the POPs Review Committee, it has added so many additional chemicals, and all of them parties need to revise their national legislation or put in place other administrative procedures in order to eliminate or reduce the intentional releases in accordance with Article 3, or reduce unintentional releases in accordance with Article 5, and also to manage waste in accordance with Article 6. There are also provisions related to specific exemptions that will allow parties to continue using these chemicals for specific applications that require a further phase-out period. So all of this will need to be considered in developing national implementation plans and also reported in the national reporting in line with Article 15, so that the convention will be implemented by parties in line with the core obligations provided in Article 3, 5, and 6. So just to mention about the reduction of releases of unintentional POPs. This is specified in Article 5 of the Convention, and the obligation includes parties to develop national action plan to eliminate or reduce the release such unintentional POPs. And as I mentioned, currently the chlorinated dioxins and furans are listed alongside PCB and HCB and other chemicals, but additional candidate POPs, brominated dioxins and mixture of brominated and chlorinated POPs are now under review. So in order to take measures for these Annex C substances, we have the toolkit that has developed many years ago and available on the website. And in order to evaluate the effectiveness of those measures, including for Annex C chemicals, the Stockholm Convention provides a procedure called effectiveness evaluation in Article 16. And in order to evaluate the effectiveness, the convention uses mainly three sources of information. The first one is Article 15, national reports. And then the second one is the global monitoring plan reports. So GMP reports, the monitoring data is also a very important evidence for evaluating the effectiveness. The third information source is the information from the compliance committee. So as you know, the Stockholm Convention has adopted the compliance mechanism, and now the committee exists and it is working towards obtaining the information that could contribute to effectiveness evaluation eventually. With regards to the information on Article 15 national reports, the committee also will look at information from Article 7 national implementation plans. As many of you hopefully also aware that the information in national implementation plan and national reports, they have a very strong linkage because parties will need to first plan how to implement the convention and then implement this, all of the measures that are agreed upon, and you would report in national reporting. And therefore, for example, information on inventory that was sort of presented in national implementation plan should also be sort of tracked in the national reporting. And so, yes, there is also quite important element in the contribution to effectiveness evaluation. And in order to implement global monitoring plan, the Stockholm Convention has established a few expert groups to support the process. First, there are regional organization groups. For each UN region, there is ROGs, consist of 6 experts per group. And these are the main actors when developing regional monitoring reports. So a total of 30 such experts are currently working very hard to develop regional reports. And then some of those ROG members are the global coordination group members. So after the regional reports are developed, these will be consolidated into a global report. And then that global report would contribute to the effectiveness evaluation. Finally, there is an effectiveness evaluation committee also established by the Conference of the Parties. And this committee includes the GMP, GCG members, as well as the compliance committee members, so that all these very important reports will all contribute to the effectiveness evaluation report. In addition, there are DGT reports or BATPEP reports, unintentional POPs reports, and so on. They would also be included in the consideration by the Effectiveness Evaluation Committee. And then there's a timeline in this slide. So currently it's 2026. These regional organization groups are preparing regional monitoring reports for submission to the COP13 in 2027. Then global monitoring reports will be prepared in 2028, and this will contribute to the effectiveness evaluation to be conducted by the COP in 2029. So as Hauson just explained, that this regional monitoring report development is heavily supported by the UNEP GEF project, now kickstarting in 2026. And it's very important to also mention that this GCMP project also supports the human milk survey, which will be quite important part when it comes to informing policy making from the GMP data. So in terms of the monitoring, there are core media designated by the GMP plan. The first one is air, because air can capture all this information in background, and so that the parties can compare the status of these contaminants in the environment. So the trend data is very important, as Mihaela and Hauson have already mentioned. So they use a passive air sampler in these air monitoring stations that exist across the globe. So here is an example of data presented in the 3rd GMP report. You can see the dioxins and furans data, for example, at the right top corner. All of these substances are currently indicating gradual declining trend, which is a very encouraging information, indicating that the Stockholm Convention is contributing to the reduction of risk from POPs. Now, as I mentioned, that the human tissue is very important information for policymakers to determine the steps that they will need to take in implementation of the Stockholm Convention. So human milk and serum, human tissues is another core media, and including through the support by the GMP project, we have the data as presented in the third GMP report. So this is a dioxin data that shows a declining trend in Japan and also globally. So with regards to the chlorinated dioxins and furans, you can already see this positive trend that shows the declining trend. With regards to PFAS, PFOA, PFOS, PFH excess, as well as more recently long-chain PFCAs have been listed because these substances are hydrophilic, meaning that it dissolves in water rather than captured in the suspended particle phase. These substances are measured in water. But because still the data sets are limited, it is a little bit difficult to discuss trend at the moment. But hopefully in the next report, you can see a bit more clearer trend so that parties can further consider policy and reflect that in their national implementation plan. So yes, as I mentioned, PFAS is mainly a lot of application that are called open application that has environmental impact, includes the use in aqueous film forming foam to control fire, and also in the pesticide or control of leaf cutting ants. It is included in the production of sulframide, which is an active ingredient used for the control of these ants. And because it is also an open application, it will have a direct impact on the environment, water environment. So you can obtain GMP3 report from the Stockholm Convention website. And then the Stockholm Convention data warehouse mentioned by Hauson, this is also available on the website from the link that is indicated here. And then Hauson also explained in detail about the GMP dashboard that provides global access to the data obtaining through the GEF project and also contributing to the GMP. So this is my final slide that to highlight again that the GMP data would support national prioritization, and also it will allow countries to grasp the trend and then contribute to the evaluation of the effectiveness of the Stockholm Convention. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kay, for that comprehensive overview about the Global Monitoring Program and all of the efforts that the Secretariat of the PRS Conventions is doing. And thank you for being on time. We're actually 2 minutes ahead of schedule. So thank you, speakers. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, maybe you have more questions for Mihaela, Haosong, and Kay. I'm looking at the Q&A box, and we have 5 new interactions there. Thank you to Victor and Sokontea. There's a question there about the HCBD toolkit, and I think Sumin already sent it as a link. There's also a question from Victor again about the directives, datasets, and recommendations. So I invite all of our speakers, please type in your answers while we have the next two speakers lined up, because I think the next two speakers will give concrete examples from their country experience. And at this point, I will introduce our first speaker who will talk about insights from the ground, and he is from Kenya. So I would like to introduce Dr. Vincent Madadi, a chemist and academic based at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And he holds a PhD in chemistry. I like how he introduced it to me that chemistry is part of our lives and how interconnected it is. He will actually tell us through his presentation and story today. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Vincent with his sharing on Kenya's experience with the GMP. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I would like to greet everyone. I will take this opportunity to share Kenya's experience with the Global Monitoring Plan. And particularly, I'll focus on approaches, data collection, interpretation, and application in policy context. The Global Monitoring Plan provides a harmonized framework for collection of comparable monitoring data. And we need that in order to be able to identify trends in levels over time and also assess the regional and global transport. It's important to identify trend because that will give us information on how effective are the measures that the countries or the parties are putting in place, whether they are contributing to the overall goal of the convention to reduce or eliminate releases of POPs in the global environment. So I would like to now share our experience from Kenya. And Kenya has been participating in Global Monitoring Plan since 2008. And in doing this, we have been able to participate in collection of samples that include the core media, such as ambient air, mother's milk, and water. And in doing this, we have been using guidelines that have been provided under the GMP guidance document, and also the protocols and standard operating procedures that have been produced through the UNEP-GEF GMP project and established monitoring programs. And so here I show you some of the approach to collection. It's important that we train the personnel in our countries in order to effectively participate in data collection. That means in order to deploy the sampling equipment for air, for water, and even the mother's milk in a way that meets international standards. We have also been participating in the training by the expert groups, training our people on how to analyze and interpret the GMP results in terms of data that is collected. Here I show you example of our sampling stations. So on the left-hand side, you see Mount Kenya sampling station, which is one of the background stations in Africa. And also I show you the one on the right-hand side, which is an urban background site at Kabete. It's about 30 kilometers from Nairobi city. And so from this sampling activity, I show you a snapshot of information that we have been able to collect from the GMP. And here on the top bar, you see dioxins and furans, which are represented up here. And so this data is from background site, not an hotspot, but the presence of these chemicals illustrate or give evidence that there are emissions from the country. And we think that these emissions could be coming from uncontrolled combustion, particularly in the municipal waste dump sites and other activities where we have uncontrolled combustion. On the lower bar, we see again pesticides. We see that the levels of pesticides are about 1,000 higher than the levels of dioxins and furan. But also we note that the pesticides were banned many years ago. However, we still detect them in our environment. And so one of the interpretation of this is that there could be some active emissions from contaminated soil that needs to be managed. And I will be showing you one of the illustrations of how we are contributing to management of this in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment. So all the data we get from the GMP, we are able to share at national workshops. We present the stakeholders and interpret to them. And also the reports that are compiled, we share with the National Ministry of Environment in order to consider in the policy formulation. We also share with the institutions that are involved in the regulations, such as the National Environment Management Authority, to inform policy formulation. Apart from that, this information we collect at national level also ends up into Africa-wide regional monitoring report, as we have been told by Kay and Hausang that these reports eventually end up at the COP, and this regional report also contributes into the global monitoring report that it goes to effectiveness evaluation. Now, the concrete applications of our monitoring activities from GMP is that we have been able to participate and support the country in developing national monitoring protocol for POPs and other chemicals for focusing on the hotspots in the country. This was in 2021. And also we have engaged National Environment Management Authority to initiate monitoring activities on the dam sites and industrial areas so that they can be able to quantify the emissions of POPs from those particular sites so that they can engage the county government and national government to put resources that are required to effectively manage this. And also, another application has been in the rehabilitation of one of the critical contaminated site in Kenya, which is called Kitengela. Probably some people might be knowing this, which was identified in the National Inventory of POPs and also in the National Implementation Plan for Kenya. In addition, Kenya has been able to develop important regulations that are focusing on POPs and other chemicals. For example, the Air Quality and Plastic Regulation in 2024, and also Toxic and Hazardous Chemical Regulation in 2024, where POPs, a number of POPs are also included among those chemicals. Now I show you typical application where we have used the GMP information to work with the government to put in place rehabilitation of contaminated site. So this was Kitengela, which is identified in the Kenya National Implementation Plan, and was established in 1960s as a temporal storage of pesticide. But over time, we had a lot of corrosion and leakage of these pesticides, poor pesticides in the soil. So the government, after some time, was able to collect the drums and the bags of these chemicals for destruction, but we remain behind with a lot of contaminated soil in the tune of 400 tons of soil that was not managed. So using the data that we had collected from the GMP, which showed that Kitengela is highly contaminated with pesticide, as we show on this chart, where other sites compared to Kitengela were very low in concentration. And so we developed a concept note that was submitted to the Africa ChemOps project, and this site was identified under the hard intervention for remediation. So in 2023, we took government officials to this site. We could experience a lot of emission and the smell of pesticide at that time. And so the university was engaged to support in rehabilitation of this site. And we developed a strategy for rehabilitation. And this included introducing a variety of plants to introduce a plant canopy so that we reduce emission into the air. And also we have engaged postgraduate students now to look at how to minimize or reduce the pesticides that are still stuck into the soil through phytoremediation and enhancing biodegradation of those compounds that are there, as we've already tried to curb the emission into the air. And so this is the one that I had for you today so that we can now interact thereafter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vincent. That is well illustrated, and I really like that you showed how the communities and how all of everybody benefited from your NIPS and GMPs. So I think there was a person who raised their hand, and I think Sumin has just alerted me that we can actually take live interaction from the audience. So may I invite that person to once again unmute and participate in the conversation if you have a question. We have 2 minutes before our next speaker. Okay, while we're waiting for her, Sumin, just keep me updated because I only see the Q&A session as it happens, and there's a very lively discussion about Annex C POPs. And there's also somebody who wrote in their local script, so maybe our interpreters can help and give us the English translation at the chat box, that would be very useful. And there is some conversation also on the chat. Thank you, Dr. Roland Weber. It's good to see you there. But while waiting for the person to join, I don't see Sumin, just jump in if you see that. I'm reminded, Vincent, in one of our projects as well, so I'm part of GGKP and we're also dealing with circular economy and GEF-related projects. So we have a project in small island developing states dealing with sound chemical and waste management. And one of the issues are obsolete pesticide management, lots of stockpiles. But then one of the struggles is what do we do with the stockpiles? And then if it leaks into the soil, what can we, how can ministries and the countries really deal with the situation? So I really like how you illustrated what you did, the step by step, and what kind of data warehousing you're doing. So thank you so much for that, Vincent. Okay, and I think that's a great segue to learn from another country. The last speaker of the day will guide us through their actions on the country of Uruguay. So I would like to introduce Ms. Silvana Martinez from the Ministry of Environment's Division of Circular Economy and Sustainability from Uruguay. She's a senior official where she leads work on circular economy and sustainability, supporting the design and implementation of national policies and programs. Silvana has represented Uruguay in international forums such as the World Economy Forum in 2025 and works closely with industry, international partners, and public institutions to advance circular solutions. We look forward to hear your insights this afternoon. Welcome, Ms. Silvana Martinez. The floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días. Disculpen que estaba muteada. Y ahora, está, así. Bueno, la idea es contarles cómo aportaron a las políticas nacionales los datos de los inventarios y los datos de los programas de monitoreo globales. Para ponerles un poco en contexto, ay, para que no, ay, no, hice cualquiera. Estoy. Ay, sí. Disculpen que tengo acá un... Ay, es esto. Ahí va. Para ponerles un poco en contexto, les quiero contar que Uruguay es un país chico de 3,5 millones de habitantes, cuya área total está casi el 90% dedicada a la actividad agropecuaria, y la actividad agropecuaria constituye de un 6 a un 7% del PBI y la agroindustrial de un 13 a 14. Por eso es muy importante todas las medidas y todas las políticas a nivel nacional que se vayan realizando por el tema de plaguicidas. Nosotros participamos desde contar con un monitor en una zona industrial en la capital de Montevideo, y además también con el monitoreo a partir de leche materna con 50 personas. ¿Cómo fue el procedimiento de elaboración de los planes de acción y cómo tanto el GMP como el inventario aportaron? Primero, nosotros identificamos todas esas fuentes de información que nos servirían para ir elaborando estas políticas, dentro de las cuales, además de las políticas y planes nacionales estratégicos, nosotros tenemos un plan muy importante de
Miss
gestión.
Silvana, if I can just intervene here, we do not see your slides moving. Would you mind
A
going
ver, un segundo
into
que lo vuelvo entonces
slide?
a...
Sorry about this. Uh,
Ay, qué
the
desastre.
slide presentation mode. Okay, we've seen it move.
Share. Y borré todas. A
Ah,
ver, sorry,
would you like us?
share.
Sumin, would
Hoy
you
la
have
pasamos.
the slides on your end? Perhaps.
I can share the screen.
Okay. Miss Silvana, we'll try to share the screen from our end, and then you can confirm so that you can focus on speaking over the slides.
En PPT,
Acá.
no, anda a la PPT primero.
No, pero ya está.
Anda a la
Can you
PPT y pone
remind us which
modo
slide?
presentación.
Ah,
Perfecto. Ahora se minimiza acá y
Okay.
anda a
al
Zoom.
Zoom.
¿Sí?
Scroll down,
Y acá,
Sumin, maybe.
Y acá
ahora sí.
share. A ver.
Okay.
Ahí,
Share tengo que poner.
share. Y ahí compartís la screen share.
Ah, no, la screen
Okay,
share.
so Silvana's trying to start again. Let's just give her
Ah,
a few minutes.
ahí
Okay.
sí.
Well, we can see your actual
La
slide.
segunda transparencia.
Can you try to make it bigger, perhaps?
Discúlpenme. No, entonces no están viendo. A ver.
Oops. Okay.
Share. Esta. Screen 2.
Screen 2.
¿Ahora la pueden
Yes.
ver?
Much
Ah, ahí
better.
está.
Thank you.
Está. ¿Está en modo presentación? Lo que no
Yes,
sé,
we can.
ya iríamos, ¿cómo fue el proceso de de elaboración de los planes de acción? Decíamos que lo primero que se hizo fue toda una búsqueda de información de las cuales los Global Monitoring Program fueron uno de los componentes principales de fuente de información, además de las políticas que desde el Ministerio se vienen desarrollando, que alcanzan también temas como residuos, estrategia de economía circular, Plan Ambiental Nacional para el Desarrollo Sostenible, con toda esa información y después constatadas y revisadas a partir de los instrumentos que se van generando de las políticas ambientales, es que nosotros generamos la información del inventario. Una vez que tuvimos el inventario, ahí se identificaron cuáles eran los puntos que deberíamos abordar, en cuáles puntos deberíamos reforzarnos y a partir de allí se elaboraron los distintos planes de acción. Voy a pasar por alto los resultados de los GMP, porque creo que lo importante es ver cómo nos aportaron a la política nacional, pero sí decirles que como aspectos importantes, nosotros en la elaboración de los planes nacionales se busca que haya una alineación con todas las políticas ambientales, más allá de las políticas de químicos, como bien decíamos, las políticas de residuos, etc. En ese marco se establecieron 5 líneas de acción estratégicas que el plan de aplicación del convenio de Estocolmo debería profundizar. Una es la gestión sostenible de sustancias químicas y productos priorizados, la gestión de plaguicidas, la prevención en la minimización de emisiones y transferencias de copa al ambiente y todo lo que tiene que ver con la parte de microplásticos, nanoplásticos y sustancias químicas de preocupación en plástico. Esto apunta más que nada también a abordar los nuevos instrumentos a nivel internacional que se están construyendo en lo que tiene que ver de plásticos. Y después hay un capítulo, un plan de acción que es transversal a todos los planes, que tiene que ver con la sensibilización, concientización y capacitación. En relación a los resultados que nosotros eh, identificamos de todo lo que es el monitoreo y los inventarios, tenemos que como resultado principal es poder evaluar la efectividad de las acciones implementadas en el marco de todos los planes de aplicación del Convenio de Estocolmo. Nosotros ahora estamos cursando el tercer actualización del plan. Y aparte nos permite obtener información de base que después nos va a poder revisar la efectividad de esas acciones. Por otro lado, una de las cosas más importantes era que Uruguay no tenía capacidades para el monitoreo y análisis de los distintos COPs en las distintas matrices, y el haber participado de estos proyectos nos generó a nosotros infraestructura y capacidades para poder monitorear y analizar. Y sobre todo mejorar todo lo que tenía que ver con el conocimiento de estas estrategias. Por otro lado, también nos permitió conformar y ser parte de una red de intercambio de experiencias y de conocimientos coordinada con socios estratégicos, o sea, hubo una transferencia de información hacia el país en relación a todo lo que tenía que ver con las capacidades analíticas, y para eso nosotros fue sumamente valioso. Además, como bien dijimos, apoyó todo lo que era la construcción de los planes de acción al identificar eso, sobre todo lo que tiene que ver con los inventarios nacionales, identificar en dónde deberíamos priorizar, cuáles serían las líneas que deberíamos priorizar y en dónde y qué sustancias deberíamos atender frente a otras. La elaboración de los inventarios también nos permitió instrumentar ámbitos de coordinación y participación intersectorial y multidisciplinarios a nivel nacional. O sea, a partir de la construcción de estos inventarios, nosotros entramos en contacto con otros organismos del Estado, con otras instituciones que fueron construyendo en conjunto estas líneas estratégicas que teníamos que desarrollar. Por otro lado, como parte importante, habíamos visto una falta de consolidación de información, una falta de saber cuál era el estado de situación del país con respecto a los COP, y eso hizo que entendiéramos que era necesario la construcción e implementación de un registro de emisiones y transferencia de contaminantes y de un observatorio ambiental de sustancias. Este observatorio ambiental de sustancias también busca eh, prevenir e irnos preparando para la incorporación, tanto en el convenio de Estocolmo como en el resto de los convenios internacionales, de sustancias que se vayan a ir sumando. Siempre Uruguay, como un país chico, nos agarra con que ya las sustancias ya se están, o hay que implementar acciones, y Uruguay todavía no hizo ese análisis previo del impacto que esto llevaría. Bueno, la idea es generar este observatorio para adelantarnos a esa situación. Y sobre todo, importante, es fortalecer todo lo que tenía que ser el marco normativo en matrices ambientales. Y ahora vamos a ver cómo fuimos desarrollando a partir de los resultados de los inventarios, cómo fuimos fortaleciendo el marco normativo, que eso también, además de fortalecer el marco normativo, nos genera instrumentos de sostenibilidad hacia algunos planes que debemos desarrollar. En ese sentido, Uruguay tiene desde el año 2013 lo que es la reglamentación sobre envases de agroquímicos y plaguicidas obsoletos. Es una normativa que utiliza la responsabilidad extendida del importador fabricante y que establece una gestión ambientalmente adecuada para ese tipo de productos. En el año 2021 surgió el decreto que limita las emisiones tanto de fuentes fijas y fuentes móviles, y establece el monitoreo de compuestos de dioxanos y furanos para diferentes actividades, como ser incineración de residuos, empresas de fabricación de clínker, sitios de disposición final, etc. Por otro lado, también, y esto es una normativa sumamente reciente del año 2025, que actualizó la norma que databa del año de 1979 y que tiene que ver con la prevención de la contaminación, la conservación y mejora de la calidad de aguas. En esta normativa se incluyeron una serie de compuestos orgánicos persistentes que deben ser controlados en función de la actividad, tanto para agua superficial como agua subterránea, así como algunos también para la parte de sedimentos. En el año 2024 surgió la reglamentación de aparatos eléctricos electrónicos que traslada la responsabilidad extendida al importador fabricante e incluye disposiciones específicas sobre bifenilos policlorados. Y además también el año pasado, a fines del año pasado, entró la reglamentación que es complementaria a la de aparatos eléctricos electrónicos de baterías de uso vehicular. Y por otro lado, y esto también con mucha incidencia de los inventarios que se fueron desarrollando, porque se determinó cuánto era la incidencia de compuestos orgánicos persistentes en lo que son residuos de obra de construcción. Y bueno, se implementó también en un decreto que es el que reglamenta la gestión de residuos de obra de construcción, demolición y reformas, que va a atender el canal de gestión, haciendo especial énfasis en aquellos residuos que pueden estar contaminados con compuestos orgánicos persistentes. Además, a partir del inventario se pudo también hacer análisis previos de la contaminación con respecto a residuos vehiculares y por eso generar información para, llegado el momento, poder realizar los marcos normativos para esta corriente de residuos, también en un marco de responsabilidad extendida del importador fabricante. En cuanto a las líneas estratégicas que se fueron desarrollando a partir de estos insumos, por un lado es identificar y sistematizar toda la fuente de información para facilitar todos los procesos de actualizaciones periódicas de los inventarios. Fortalecer a partir de ver las tendencias que se encontraban en los diferentes compuestos orgánicos y los datos del monitoreo. Bueno, fortalecer el control del ingreso de algunos productos que ya están regulados o prohibidos. Esto tiene que ver con que si seguíamos identificando niveles de alguna de las sustancias que ya
Miss
fueron...
Martinez, thank you
Sí.
so much, but I think we have 1 minute left. So if we can get to your final slide, thank you so much.
Es esta igual la última diapositiva. Y bueno, y
Thank
definir todo lo que
you.
tenía que ver, se identificaron el tema de los pasivos ambientales, entonces está definir las hojas de rutas para poder gestionar y eliminar esos pasivos ambientales, trabajar mucho con lo que es la parte de residuos plásticos y ver cómo mejorar y generar capacidades para el reciclaje seguro de estos plásticos. Definir instrumentos de promoción para la adopción de mejores tecnologías o sustituto. En ese sentido, se está trabajando mucho con los gobiernos departamentales en lo que tiene que ver la disposición final de residuos y de mejorar todo lo que es la generación de emisiones no intencionales por las quemas no controladas de residuos. Y bueno, y sobre todo teniendo la experiencia adquirida para la parte de monitoreo, generar nuevas redes de monitoreo y asegurar la sostenibilidad de los sistemas de monitoreo, tanto de monitoreo en las matrices ambientales como también la vigilancia en la salud de los trabajadores. Por otro lado, la idea es buscar la sostenibilidad de las acciones que se vienen desarrollando y por eso diseñar instrumentos financieros que permitan impulsar mejores tecnologías en todo lo que es la adopción de los procesos productivos y también en los sistemas agrícolas sostenibles. Y por último, como dijimos, desarrollar este registro de emisiones de contaminantes y el Observatorio Ambiental de Sustancias, que nos parece fundamental como concientización a la población e información, tanto que pueda servir para la población, pero como también la generación de líneas estratégicas de investigación. Bueno, dejo por acá y disculpe si me pasé por algunos minutitos.
Oh, it's excellent. Thank you so much, Miss Martinez, for your good sharing. And I like how you made it so interconnected, how everything that you're doing for POPs, PFAS, and the GMP is related to the other waste streams such as e-waste and end-of-life vehicles. That's very relevant. And now we have 2 minutes for Q&A. So I'm glad to announce that there are 7 answers already for those who have typed in their questions on the Q&A box. And if there is one or two persons who would like to ask our speakers, and at this point, may I invite our panelists to open their camera so that our participants can see you and address their questions to you. I'm happy to... Oh, there is one hand open. Thank you so much for the hand. Sumin, I'm trying to scroll through. That person, please unmute yourself and welcome to speak. Miss Dana. Sumin, I think she's still on mute. How do we help? Miss Dana, you can unmute yourself and please welcome to the floor. Sumin, if you can assist. Okay. Oh, it was a mistake. It's okay. Welcome, Dana. You are welcome anytime. But I think, just out of curiosity, there was one question from our participant who said, who asked, let me just go to it. Was there a correlation between unintentional pop emissions and the burning of pops in cement kilns and the presence of waste incineration plants in the region? Does any one of our speakers want to say about that?
Could you please, because I think I
Okay.
can.
There was a question earlier. Was there a correlation between unintentional pop emissions and the burning of pops in cement kilns and the presence of waste incineration plants? Maybe you could answer, Vincent or Silvana, in your context. Do you notice this in your countries?
From the global monitoring plan point of view, we are not measuring active sources, so we cannot answer the question directly, but we know that incineration of waste, if the incinerator do not meet the high temperature condition, then they tend to emit UPOPs, dioxins and furans. But what we have also seen in GMP from Africa region, we have found that the sites that are in the areas where we have recycling of e-waste, we have seen higher levels of brominated compounds. So that is the evidence we have, but directly on cement, we do not have that direct linkage. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Silvana, I noticed you unmuted. Would you like to add something on that?
Sí, en relación a cuando se hizo el inventario de emisiones no intencionales, como parte de la herramienta que se utiliza, se evalúa para las diferentes fuentes cuál es el aporte a las emisiones no intencionales. Entonces tenemos por un lado lo que es la parte de quema no controlada de residuos, y por otro lado todo lo que son las plantas de incineración de residuos. Entonces, en base a eso es que en en la política ambiental nacional de aire, nosotros incluimos el control de dioxinas y furanos, en los monitoreos de control de dioxinas y furanos en esas instalaciones. Y en paralelo se está trabajando en mejorar todo lo que es la gestión de residuos domiciliarios para evitar la indiscriminada quema de estos residuos, y como bien decía también nuestro compañero de Kenia, el tema de la informalidad en la gestión de residuos, como es la quema de aparatos eléctricos electrónicos.
Thank you so much. Those are really concrete answers. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of the speakers for today's webinar for your time and your attention. Also, all of our participants, we peaked at 89 participants, and right now we still have 62 on the call. Thank you so much for your participation and commitment this Friday. The conversation will go on. We have our communities of practice on the Green Forum, and Sumin will drop the link there, and you will also all receive an email of this webinar recording. So once again, thank you so much for your participation, and we wish you a very good weekend and best wishes on your global monitoring plans and POPs activities. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.